Hello everyone, I am Dr. Mary Berifin, a faculty from Department of English, Vienna, VJYEC. Before we begin the session, let me start with a quick question. Have you ever felt zoned out during a class or nodded along while a friend was speaking? If that has ever happened to you, don't worry, you're not alone. Today, we are going to explore why that happens and more importantly, how we can become better listeners. Now, here's something interesting. Most of us assume that listening simply means not talking, right? If we are silent while someone else is speaking, we believe that we are listening, isn't it? But listening is far more complex than that. Listening is actually not a passive act, but it is an active cognitive process. And even when it doesn't feel like it, your brain is working continuously for it. That is, it receives sounds, process meaning, interpret tone, connect ideas, and make judgments, all at the same time. So today, we are going to look under the hood and decode how this mechanism actually works. So here, think of it. When someone speaks, they are sending a signal, and that signal includes their words, tone of voice, facial expression, body language, and even emotional energy, which is straightforward. But here's where it becomes challenging. So alongside the signal, we also encounter noises, right? And most of the time, noise can be external, like background conversations, traffic sounds, notification on your mobile phones. Besides, sometimes it can also be internal, like your thoughts, assumption, judgment, or even what you plan to say next. So here, it should be understood that listening is the ability to decode the signal through all the static. And honestly, most of us struggle with this more than we realize, right? Because even something as small as a notification can interrupt the listening process. Therefore, for effective listening, we must consciously eliminate the distractions because listening is not just about hearing sounds. It also requires conscious attention and intentional focus. Now, here's something fascinating. There isn't just one way to listen. There are actually 6 different listening systems. And the interesting part is you probably switch between them throughout the day, often without realizing it. So now, think of them like apps on your mobile phone. You don't use the same app for everything, right? You open one that fits the situation. Apparently, listening also works the same way. So, depending on whether you're in a classroom, talking to a friend, attending a meeting, or resolving a conflict, your brain activates a different listening mode. So, let's take a closer look at each one and see which app you tend to use most often. Let's begin with discriminative listening. So, discriminative listening is the most basic form of listening and it focuses not just on what is being said but on how it is being said. For example, imagine your mother saying, "I'm fine," with lower voice. Here, the word says one thing, but the tone says something completely different, isn't it? So, as your mother's voice is lower, you know instantly that she is not fine, isn't it? And so, that is discriminative listening at work. So, think about it. When we listen to someone, we are not just hearing their words, but we are actually picking up on their tone, pitch, volume, faces, and even their facial expressions, all of which forms the music behind the words. And we all do this naturally without even realizing it, which is almost like we have an emotional radar which constantly scan and interpret on how something is being said and not just on what is being said. And ultimately, this is how we detect the sarcasm, excitement, fear, or even hidden feelings beneath the surface of words. So, therefore, it is understood that this type of listening forms the foundation of every other type of listening we will be talking about in this session. Now, let's look at the 2 listening systems that you probably use very often in academic setting. You might not even realize you're using them, but you do almost every single day. So, think of this as your analytical tool. The first one is the comprehensive listening. So, comprehensive listening is a type of listening you use when your goal is to understand and learn. For example, right now, as you listen to this session, your brain is processing information, observing vocabulary, connecting the ideas. So, here the brain is quietly telling itself, store this might be important, isn't it? So, that is comprehensive listening. Now, let's contrast this with critical listening. So, critical listening is evaluative, where you are not just receiving information but you are analyzing it. So, this type of listening is used during a debate, a speech, a sales presentation, or even during a group project. So, when you present yourself during such situation, your internal dialogue sounds something like this. Is this accurate? Does this argument make sense? Is there evidence? Are they trying to influence me? Isn't it? So, here's the key difference. Comprehensive listening is open and receptive, while critical listening is skeptical and analytical. But both are extremely valuable. And the key here is to know all about when to use which one, because bringing critical listening into emotional conversation, for example, may not always be appropriate. Next, we move to what I like to call the connector. So, these two listening systems are deeply connected to relationship and enjoyment. First is the therapeutic listening. So, this type of listening happens when someone comes to you feeling upset, overwhelmed, or vulnerable. And here, instead of offering advice, instead of trying to fix the problem, what you do is simple. You just listen. You allow them to speak. You hold space and you give them your full presence. So that is therapeutic listening at work. And honestly, it is one of the most powerful gifts you can offer another human being, right? Now, let's look at the other type, appreciative listening. So this is appreciative listening. So this appreciative listening is effortless listening, where you are not analyzing things, memorizing, and not even evaluating. But what you do is you just simply enjoy it, like music, a broadcast, a captivating story, a friend sharing something funny at lunch. So, where you just listen for the vibe, rhythm, and the emotional flow. So, here's what we see. One type of listening heals, that is therapeutic listening, and the other type of listening, that is appreciative listening, inspires. And importantly, it should be understood that both are essential for a daily lives. Now, let's talk about the one we are all guilty of, which is the selective listening. So, in this selective listening, we hear only what we want to hear. For example, when someone gives you feedback and says, "You did a great job overall, but there are a few areas to improvise." So here, your brain focuses only on the compliment while completely tuning out the constructive criticism. So the problem with selective listening is you miss the details and the context, and that's where exactly misunderstandings begin. So it should be understood that selective listening gives you only a partial reality, and that partial reality often leads to confusion, conflicts, and poor decisions. So now, the big question is why? Why do we tune out while listening? Is it because of laziness or lack of interest? Here, it should be understood that there are actually forces that interfere with our listening, and we call this as the interference field. So, think of it like a radar screen with three zones, which are more like three categories of obstacles that disrupt our ability to listen effectively. Apparently, these zones appear to be environmental, psychological, and behavioral, and each one creates a different kind of disruption. So, if you want to become a better listener, you need to recognize what's happening in each of these areas, because you can't fix what you don't notice, right? So, let's break them one by one. Now, let's start with the first zone, that is the environmental blockers. So, these are the physical or external barriers that interfere with listening. So, here the first blockers which we look upon under this category is noise, which can be from construction outside, music playing in the background, people talking nearby. So ultimately, these bloggers appears to be the classic distractions. And the second blogger or the poor acoustics, which is like echo-filled rooms where sound bounces and becomes unclear. And the third blockers are the technology issues like laggy Zoom calls, unclear microphones, or frozen screens. So we must have all experienced such moment, especially during online classes, right? And so the final blockers are the language barriers, which is the unfamiliar accent, complex vocabulary, or fast speech that makes it difficult to follow the message for the listeners. Next, we move to psychological bloggers. And these psychological bloggers are not external and they happen entirely inside your mind. So, have you ever assumed you knew what someone was going to say and you stopped listening halfway though? If so, such cases we call it as pre-computation error, where your brain moves fast forward mode and you start predicting the ending. And while you are mentally writing the conclusion, you actually miss the story's clarity. For instance, imagine someone begins sharing something and you think, oh, I know where this is going. And then suddenly they take a completely unexpected turn, and that's where you get stuck and ask, sorry, can you repeat that? And so that moment is what we call as the psychological bloggers. So this type of bloggers should also be taken care, because psychological bloggers are powerful as they are invisible and can completely disconnect us from the present conversation. Finally, we come to behavioral bloggers. So, these are not external distractions, but they are choices we make, and the biggest problem here is multitasking, like scrolling and texting. Sometimes this multitasking feels productive, but research tells something important, that we are not truly doing two things at once, but it is our brain which is simply switching back and forth very quickly. And every time it switches, you lose a little bit of the message. Besides to multitasking, we also have something else called disinterest. So, in cases, if you're not engaged into the classroom, or if you don't care about the speaker's conversation, your brain simply does not retain the information and you cannot remember what you never truly paid attention to, right? So now, the important question, how do we fix all of this? So to become a dynamic listener should read the room, should read the situation and adjust accordingly. Now, think of it like tuning dials on a sound mixer. So different situation requires different listening settings, right? For example, in a classroom setting, you need to dial up comprehensive listening, because in a classroom, you are there to understand, observe and learn things. While in a debate or disagreement, you have to dial up to critical listening, because you need to analyze things carefully and ask questions. Besides, when a friend is struggling, you have to dial up to therapeutic listening with patience. So, mastering in listening is not just about being perfect at one type, but it is all about knowing which type to use and when. So, here's a little cheat sheet for life. You can screenshot this if you want seriously. Next time you are in a conversation, ask yourself two simple questions. What's my goal and what is in the way? And so that is the start of becoming a better listener. So, listening well takes work. It's a discipline. It's not just about ears, but it is all about focus, empathy, and patience. And the cool part is you can get better at it by listening to one conversation at a time, listening to one class at a time, and listening to one friend at a time. Because you have the power to make people feel heard. And that's a superpower. Use it. Thank you.
Like, share, comment, and subscribe VNR Digital Learning Resource YouTube channel.